Thank you very much, distinguished Vice Minister. I'm now pleased to give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Brazil, Foreign Minister Nunes. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, foreign ministers, heads of delegation, when I see in front of me a sign like this, I can only remember situations that some of us have lived through in the past, dark and difficult years. I remember dear friends who died in prison, in exile, colleagues from so many places, from Peru, from Nicaragua, from Haiti, from Colombia, from Chile, from Uruguay, from Paraguay, from Brazil, you name it. And here, in these difficult moments, before democracy unfurled its great wings over our continent, we begged international organizations for help. We came banging on the doors of the OAS to help us defending human rights and condemning the violations that were daily being committed against them. And that is why the crisis that the Venezuelan people are living today imposes on each of us some very, very deep thinking and thinking back to the fact that democracy is not a luxury, it's an essential good. So what can we do collectively to make a difference, to reach out to the Venezuelan citizens, to rescue their fundamental freedoms, to put them in a situation to define and decide their own future freely? It goes without saying that only the Venezuelans themselves can decide freely. But the international community has a role to play as well. At the very time when democracy is triumphing, this is the time when we can insist on an inalienable and inextricable support to non-interventionism. But that doesn't mean we can simply stand here and wait to see what happens. We are here to uphold the foundational freedoms that this organization is based on. Inaction and indifference are not options. Self-determination, it goes without saying. Sovereignty. Self-determination and sovereignty, let me say it again. These are the basis on which a country can move forward freely. Free elections, a free calendar for elections, not to be moved and reshaped depending on what's best for the prevailing powers, not having one's passports confiscated to avoid letting people travel. There are so many reasons that we know by heart why we need to stand up. And I'm not talking here about abstract principle, need I say it. We're talking about people dying as a result of savagery, oppression, repression, a vicious cycle of repression and resistance, that only ends up with ever more numbers of dead. We in Brazil think that a number of initiatives come to mind that might be constructive. The first is to continue this meeting of foreign ministers, not to adjourn it, but to keep it going so that we can meet constantly as needed to find points of consensus amongst ourselves and points of consensus amongst ourselves and others who might be helpful. Let us think of a point of contact that would report periodically to the meeting, the ongoing meeting of foreign ministers, and naturally, from the moment in which a possible agreement among parties might appear to be possible, then certainly, indispensably, we need facilitators. Now, we are gravely concerned by the present situation and the course that appears to have been set by President Maduro, which it looks is fully contrary to the Bolivarian Constitution itself. That process will only exacerbate the present political antagonism and deepen the polarization, which I greatly fear will lead Venezuela to ever greater chaos. And that is why we call out to Venezuela and interventionist forces to stop, just stop, and allow serious, genuine dialogue to ensue. We're not here to point fingers, to scathe, to shame, to condemn, let alone to intervene. We are here, all of us, to forge the necessary political means by which this crisis might be overcome. And yes, indeed, this Organization of American States has the legitimacy to act in that particular way. The crisis of democracy in Venezuela, from our standpoint, arises from issues that we understand. There is a humanitarian dimension to this. Whatever our view is on the politics of the thing, there is a humanitarian crisis that we all recognize. And let me say to each of them, they're all welcome in Brazil. My dear friend from Bolivia knows that we have just approved a law on immigration that I myself have written and pushed to embrace immigration and to face the challenges that it may pose, not with opposition or resistance, but in a forward and positive movement. People who immigrate to Brazil, who migrate to Brazil, aren't coming because they want to. We understand that. They're out of food, they're out of medicine, and they're out of luck. And that's why they're coming. And we would hope that the Venezuelan government would understand that Brazil, like other sister republics, are ready to help, ready to reach out, ready to make a difference. Let us craft and carve out that space for negotiation so that democracy may be restored, and so that Venezuela finds peace. That is what Brazil wants, and I dare say what we all want. All of us here who sit in great good faith, deeply concerned by this crisis, which, quite aside from the ideologies that are in conflict, must compel an answer to save the lives of that people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement, Mr. Foreign Minister. And now we give the floor to the Foreign Minister of the Dominican Republic. Mr. President, distinguished Minister, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, above all, I would like to thank my fellow foreign ministers for electing us as Vice President for this meeting of consultation this afternoon. All of us present here have in common the desire and will of our governments to assist in the solution of the political and social crisis affecting a sister country, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. But the differences on the way of doing this are expressed in this body, calling for common sense and equity without assuming commitments which might be well used as arguments for disqualifying the decision. The only thing that can't be obviated involves all countries of the hemisphere in the commitment to avoid the repetition of violent incidents which have marked our history for more than 5 centuries. So it's important for us to leave aside sectarianism and be guided by common sense. Venezuela, now more than ever, needs a national reconciliation agreement leading it to peaceful coexistence once again. And this can only be done through a negotiation, a broad negotiation involving both of the parties in conflict. What I want to invoke here in this meeting of consultation of foreign ministers on behalf of the Dominican Republic is the need to allow a broad space for the parties in conflict so that they can negotiate a fair way out of the crisis, on the understanding that it's not a voice crying in the desert, but rather the expression of all of our peoples. I know that the feeling of many foreign ministers and their peoples will agree with me when I say that there should be a commission or a committee of friends which would guarantee that there is full compliance with the agreements reached. Because when you talk about a way out outside of the two sectors involved, would really be a waste of time and would make it impossible to do anything other than promote chaos and the lack of governance, which has Venezuela now involved in a crisis which is involving or affecting the way of life of 30 million Venezuelans. We're not going to talk about the right or wrong of people's arguments on one side or the other, but it is an undeniable truth that the Venezuelan government has said and repeated that it will not obey the decisions of the OAS. So we need to delink the process from the OAS. Therefore, it's obvious that the rest of the countries in the OAS cannot subordinate themselves to the whims of any of its members. The only thing that's clear in this whole thing is that by the traditional means, there will not be a peaceful solution to the conflict in Venezuela. Its government has said that it will negotiate with countries ready to mediate in the crisis, and only them. And that's why some questions have cropped up, and I don't have any answer to that. What do we want to happen in Venezuela? Do we want peace? Do we want peaceful coexistence, respect for human rights, the channeling of democracy? Or do we want a continuation of the present situation affecting the entire Venezuelan people? Mr. President, distinguished foreign ministers in Latin America, we have provoked many scenes of violence which have been very difficult to stanch. We have seen glorious gestures or deeds of independence in the past. But we also have had internal wars, struggles, internecine strife. Allow me to give the example of our own Dominican history. In 1962, we elected the first democratic government after 31 years of dictatorship. But months later, this legitimate government was overthrown by a military coup with the support of the opposition. There were 18 months that it took for the people to go out into the streets demanding the return of constitutionality. And in hours, we were in a civil war with thousands of dead, our own people, and a military intervention from a foreign country. What I want to say is that a fratricidal war is something that no country recovers from, because blood is shed among brothers and it never dries. This tragedy must be avoided in Venezuela. I thank you very much.
Many thanks for your statement, sir. Secretary Tom Shannon of the United States has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To you, sir, to the Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To you, sir, to the Secretary General, and to all my colleagues, I extend my respect and gratitude for your presence here today as we discuss the increasingly dire situation in Venezuela. Over the last 18 months, we have seen a dramatic erosion of constitutional rule in Venezuela. This extends from disputes over the National Assembly's makeup and powers, the thwarting of the recall referendum late last year, the Supreme Court's assumption of basic legislative functions in recent months, the ongoing imprisonment of opposition leaders and other restrictions on individual freedoms, including the use of military tribunals to try civilians, the violent repression of peaceful protests, and most recently, the effort to seat a constitutional assembly to usurp the role of the National Assembly. All of these signal a rupture in Venezuela's democratic and constitutional order. At the same time, we have all been moved by the humanitarian hardships faced by 31 million Venezuelans. Economic stagnation has given way to hyperinflation and increasing economic instability. Venezuelan citizens struggle to maintain even basic access to food and medicine. The United States has condemned the government's violent crackdown against the parties of the parliamentary majority and civil society. In just the past 2 months of political protests, as has been noted, more than 60 people have been killed, more than 1,000 injured, and nearly 3,000 detained, including 331 civilians charged criminally by military courts. I know most other states have been similarly disturbed by the course of events in Venezuela and ever more determined to do what we can to address it. Mr. Chairman, beyond this region, the European Union and the Vatican have also expressed grave concerns regarding events unfolding in Venezuela. We also have seen a growing willingness among Venezuela's neighbors to assist in finding a peaceful, democratic, and comprehensive solution to the problems facing the Venezuelan people. Let me underscore my nation's continuing call for nonviolence in the streets of Venezuela. The rights of peaceful assembly and peaceful protest ought to be protected and not repressed. The unfortunate decision by the government of Venezuela to initiate the nation's withdrawal from this organization will do nothing to resolve the country's woes. Withdrawal will only deprive Venezuelans of the tools and institutions they need just when they need them most. Mr. Chairman, instead of abandoning our hemispheric community of democratic nations and further isolating itself from the international community, we urge the Venezuelan government to fulfill the commitments it freely made last fall during its participation in the Vatican-backed dialogue process, namely to promote free elections, respect the independence of the National Assembly, respect the freedoms of all of Venezuela's political prisoners, and meet the humanitarian needs of the Venezuelan people. The Organization of American States can partner with other actors in the international community on a renewed effort to identify an agreed path out of the polarization and violence we see to Venezuela toward a better future. The United States supports the proposal contained in the draft declarations calling for the establishment of a contact group to guide the next stage of our diplomatic efforts. We believe there is an international role in the rebuilding of trust among the main political actors in Venezuela, as well as the reduction of tensions among citizens and their institutions. Any new effort must begin with concrete, confidence-building steps of the kind laid out in our declarations today. Many of these are no more than fulfillment of existing constitutional obligations the government has bypassed or ignored. Our goal is to return to the full respect for the rule of law, the full respect for freedoms of political expression and participation. Mr. Chairman, the collective commitment to promote and consolidate democracy that we, the nations of the Americas, have enshrined in core OAS instruments remains a model for other regions in the world. Today is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that this commitment remains alive and well and relevant to the current plight of our Venezuelan neighbors. Let us continue to show the world that inter-American solidarity can help find a path back to peace and prosperity for an essential member of our American family, always mindful that our solidarity is based on the respect and legitimacy that extends from the self-determination of peoples and not the self-perpetuation of governments. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Carlos Castañeda of El Salvador, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President Carlos Raúl Morales. I would first like to greet the honorable ministers of foreign affairs and heads of delegation present in this 29th meeting of consultation. El Salvador wishes to state that historically it has been demonstrated that dialogue and negotiation are fundamental tools to overcome differences which may arise, not only between states, but also within our societies. Because of this, we feel that we must make every effort that we can to contribute to a process of dialogue and negotiation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And the best way of the OAS is on the basis of the purposes and fundamental principles consecrated in Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Inter-American Charter, which gave life to this organization. As we said before, El Salvador will favor a dialogue giving concrete results on the short term as the first option for normalizing the situation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, observing the principles of international law and good faith, respect for sovereignty, and especially non-intervention in Venezuela's internal affairs. For that reason, it's important to reiterate the spirit of the Permanent Council's declaration last November, where we agreed to unlimited support for dialogue among the parties. We think this should be the direction that we go in supporting a dialogue within respect for human rights and the rule of law. In other words, support for any initiative promoting negotiation and which opens the doors to an agreement for democratic stability and a political solution to benefit the Venezuelans in order to promote peaceful comity within Venezuela. El Salvador, on the basis of its experience and having overcome a very painful civil war, wishes to underscore that there is no such thing as an unreconcilable difference when people have the will to work together for peace. We know that the support of international organization is key when carried out in coordination and at the request of the parties concerned in order to reach a successful and permanent solution. Along these lines, I would like to repeat our conviction that it is up to the Venezuelans to find a solution or these solutions to the situation they confront. And that should be the direction our suggestion should go in. I would like to express the wishes of my country, El Salvador, that efforts continue toward dialogue, producing concrete
The Subsecretary and Foreign Minister of Uruguay has the floor. Mr. President, distinguished ministers of foreign affairs, distinguished special envoys, distinguished Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, sir, allow me to begin by congratulating you on your election to the presidency of this 29th meeting of consultation of ministers of foreign affairs. You have Uruguay's full support and hopes that the results of this meeting will be up to the task, up to the important reason why we have come here. Indeed, reasons that compel us and that are older than the OAS itself. The hemispheric pertinence of matters we are discussing here, urgent as they are, and of such common interest to every state in this hemisphere, are what compel us. From the preparatory meetings, we have been following with great seriousness and commitment every step that has led to this 29th meeting of consultation of ministers of foreign affairs, which gives us an opportunity to consider the situation in the Venezuelan Bolivarian Republic from the standpoint of the foundational principles of the Charter: sovereignty, self-determination, non-interference in domestic affairs, international cooperation, as well as the promotion of democracy and human rights. The deterioration of the political, social, and economic situation in Venezuela is the reason why we are here today. And we hope that in coming, we can in some manner or means contribute to a solution to the problems that assail that country, whilst at the same time fully respecting the principles of non-intervention and a respect for the sovereignty of that nation. Along with other countries in the hemisphere, Mr. President, my country has followed very closely every twist and turn of the development of the crisis in Venezuela. And we understand how grave the individual and collective burden has been. Just in the last weeks, not to say days, we have seen a growing escalation in the violence and radicalization that fills us both with grief and concern. As the foreign minister of my country said just recently when speaking to the Uruguayan Parliament, what is happening in Venezuela is a tragedy. We are not indifferent to the suffering of that population. It is indeed the obligation of this region to become fully participatory in the search for a solution on the basis of the regional instruments that we have signed and that give us a means by which we can reach out to our sister republic, Venezuela. Naturally, we bear in mind fully the full respect for the principle of non-intervention in the affairs of Venezuela. This is a subtle and a complex analysis because clearly to strike a balance between the two values I've just mentioned is essential. We affirm that Uruguay, for its part, has been faithful to its long and valiant diplomatic history, always working on behalf of consensus, working on behalf of dialogue, working on behalf of the promotion and protection of human rights, and the subscription to the principles we have signed internationally. Our presence here is not to sanction, it is not to shame, it is to uphold the principles on which this organization is based. And we believe that this is the forum which is most apt, most tailored to the very task we have at hand. That is to craft a broad consensus that will bring everyone together. We love peace. We believe in peace. We are defenders of our commitments internationally. We are averse to the any kind of curtailment of the principle of non-intervention in domestic affairs. And it is with all of that in mind that we are here working very committed and very focused on our obligations as a regional organization. Our aim is consensus. Our aim is to build bridges. Our aim is to bring together those who, for the moment, cannot speak to each other. Dare we hope for something effective and efficient? Yes, I believe we can, and I believe we must. That is our obligation. That is our highest responsibility, to ensure that this organization is not just an organization for dialogue and discussion, but a forum, an organization that will make a difference for our Venezuelan brothers and sisters who must emerge from this crisis. We can leave no stone unturned in the search for that consensus. So let's move forward in that understanding. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor subsecretario, por su intervención.
Thank you, distinguished Underminister.
Mina Johnson-Smith, you have the floor, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleague ministers, ambassadors, good afternoon. Jamaica supports the position earlier enunciated by the Honorable Minister of Bahamas on behalf of CARICOM, but we speak today also because Jamaica's friendship with Venezuela is long-standing and strong. So too is our relationship with and our relationships within the Organization of American States. Our bonds with Venezuela date back to the refuge provided in 1815 to the great liberator Simón Bolívar, where he wrote the Jamaica Letters, and in whose memory a room is dedicated in this great edifice. Our regional and hemispheric positions are expressed at the OAS and through our bilateral relationships. We're bound together not only by our shared historical, cultural, and political experiences, but also by the challenges we face as people of the Americas. It is for these reasons that we have observed and are gravely concerned by the continued deterioration of the situation in Venezuela, including the increased violence, loss of life, damage to infrastructure, severe hardships for their people, and a hardening of deeply entrenched positions by both government and opposition groups. The situation in Venezuela is not only a national issue, however, as its proportions have now made it a matter of regional and international concern. Excellencies, the multilateral system is essential for safeguarding the interests of all states. We maintain the view that the OAS is the best regional mechanism which provides a framework that outlines a series of joint actions that deal with crises, including the very important political, diplomatic, and dialogue mechanisms designed to prevent the outbreak or escalation of crises. As an active member of the OAS and one which takes its international responsibilities seriously, Jamaica will therefore continue to take advantage of the good office's role of the OAS to help to find meaningful and lasting solutions to regional challenges. Jamaica will continue to fulfill its obligations in trying to find a diplomatic and a pragmatic series of solutions to the situation in Venezuela. We continue to encourage dialogue and to hear the views of member states, including those of Venezuela, on the developments in that country. Admittedly, there are differing views among member states, and we respect the diversity of opinions and approaches as a community of independent states. Notwithstanding, we are united in our view that respect for certain fundamental values and principles, including the maintenance of rule of law, respect for human rights and democracy, as well as non-intervention in the internal affairs of states, are valuable and pertinent in addressing the grave concerns we have about the situation. For Jamaica, as CARICOM states and others, suspension of Venezuela from the OAS was never desirable, and it is regrettable, therefore, that Venezuela has decided to withdraw from membership of the OAS. Jamaica continues to favor highly meaningful dialogue and discourages the isolation of Venezuela. We therefore invite the government of Venezuela to reconsider that decision. We will continue to express our friendship and solidarity with the Venezuelan people and maintain our conviction that it is imperative that the Venezuelan people be allowed to find a peaceful and lasting national solution to the untenable situations which exist. We therefore reiterate our desire to see all parties in Venezuela commit to engaging in a renewed dialogue process and negotiations which will lead to a comprehensive political agreement with established timelines, concrete actions and guarantees to ensure its implementation for the well-being of Venezuela and its peoples. As members of the regional community, Jamaica stands ready to lend any support that may be deemed appropriate and helpful. We note that several modalities have been proposed today, and in that regard, we reiterate our willingness to participate in a group of friends mechanism to offer any assistance that will facilitate renewed dialogue and negotiations between the government and the opposition so as to alleviate the serious challenges facing Venezuela's people today. I thank you.
Give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Peru, Ricardo Luna. You have the floor. Distinguished President, Foreign Ministers, esteemed representatives, Mr. Secretary General, we are meeting today to reaffirm our responsibility to safeguard the democratic values that sustain the inter-American system, and to offer the Venezuelan government our help in order to identify ways of solution to the crisis confronting that country. This is the most important thing we can do to cooperate toward a consensus solution to the situation in Venezuela. As member countries of the OAS, we have the responsibility to promote peace, security, and democracy. And for that reason, on the basis of hemispheric solidarity and non-intervention, we must find ways and means to have a true sustainable and transparent process whereby the government and the opposition can find a way to overcome this situation structurally affecting the way of life and the conditions of life of the Venezuelan people. We observe with grave concern the anguish in a context of violence and deterioration of the democratic order in Venezuela. This has come to a breaking point, a very serious situation, and the suggestion of a constituent assembly as a parallel to the true democratic order. There are serious violent situations and a humanitarian crisis. The reiterated efforts have not succeeded in reverting the situation. Peru, from the very outset, President Kuczynski has expressed his intention and our intention to cooperate with Venezuela to allow a way out of the crisis. We are meeting here to help transparently, to help Venezuela to find a solution which will be respectful and supported by the other countries in the organization. As we've said, we consider it would be a good idea to establish a contact group sufficiently representative and balanced in composition to open channels with the Venezuelan government, which will meet the expectations of all the society of Venezuela. This effort must bear in mind the concerns expressed on the establishment of an electoral calendar, guarantees for effective independence of branches of government, the release of political prisoners, and priority attention to the humanitarian situation. All of this is what is needed to exercise representative democracy in Venezuela. We reiterate our confidence in multilateralism and the mechanisms established by the Charter and the Democratic Charter, which are the defense of democracy and non-intervention in the internal affairs of countries, as the best selfless way to reestablish the democratic order. We would straight away ask Venezuela, with the greatest respect, to reconsider its withdrawal from the organization. Its historic cooperation in the very creation of the Inter-American Community is much more valuable than an answer forced by events, the press of events. I thank you very much. I thank you very much, and we now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, Rodrigo González Sanz.
Thank you, Mr. President. The deaths, the injured, the detentions that have followed the social protests that are ongoing in Venezuela for over these 60 days now offers a tally of over 60 dead. The civilians that have been pulled before military tribunals, the humanitarian crisis that has ensued, the economic collapse that is upon Venezuela are but a few of the reasons we are here today. Now, 35 days have passed since we first proposed this meeting. That, frankly, is shameful, particularly given what I have just mentioned and what we are all witnessing. The Venezuelan crisis is the crisis of the hemisphere. Our own face is upon that crisis. It is ours, in fact. And it is therefore our obligation, all of the member states of this organization, to come together within the Permanent Council, within the General Assembly, within a meeting such as this, to act with responsibility and with coherence, with logical process, and in a manner that is not indifferent nor complacent. We know that the values that are at the heart of our charter compel us to come forward, to find a peaceful solution to controversies, to look for a mean to overcome misunderstandings. This House is the House of the Americas, and the OAS, therefore, should always remain above any conflict, seeking to use its good offices to resolve them. As Benito Juarez used to say, and I quote, "Among individuals as among nations, it is the respect for the rights of others that constitutes peace." Now, 16 years ago, we unanimously adopted in Lima the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and it was that very charter that managed to defend Venezuelan democracy in 2002, a time which also gave rise to accusations of interference and interventionism. The Charter is an instrument of preventive diplomacy. It's not a punitive instrument, and we needn't be ashamed of it or fear it in any manner. It is an inextricable part of the inter-American system, and as such we must promote it, protect it, defend and comply with conviction and with rigor all of its principles. The inter-American system should bring us together with common principles such as democracy, human rights, the rule of law, peace, international security, and sustainable development. This is a part of our legacy, both legal and through history, and it is quite properly recognized internationally as the jewel it is. Nonetheless, the inter-American system needs to be strengthened. It needs to remain credible. And that is up to us. It depends on the political will of those of us sitting here around this table. The survival of the inter-American system will have to be hinged to our recognition that Venezuela faces a systemic and structural crisis, and therefore we need political will to act as one and without hesitation, and without fear of calling a spade, and to move forward to assist that country in overcoming its present stagnation and polarization. To restore democracy and the rule of law, economic governance that is responsible in Venezuela certainly won't be easy, but neither is it impossible. We can talk about several possible solutions. What we cannot do is to simply stand by and allow the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to walk away from the Charter and from its obligations as a founding member of this organization. By that, it would be really shaking its own institutionality and ripping from the National Assembly its constitutional powers. That it cannot do. Neither can it continue to silence critical voices, be they of students, of journalists, of representatives of civil society, human rights defenders, or simple representatives of the opposition. It's important that something other than ongoing militarization of the conflict occur, where more and more civilians are handed arms, wherein there are increasing arbitrary arrests and dissidents are thrown into jail, where expropriations are the rule of the day in the private sector, where interventionism is an easy accusation, and the legitimate concern of the member states in this room is disregarded. We believe that the community the international community is quite properly worried. We continue to look for positive reactions, or at least a glimmer of recognition on the part of the Venezuelan government that it understands what we're trying to do. Nonetheless, Costa Rica would like to insist yet again on the value of peace, the value of a national agreement that would be inclusive, that would be viable, that would be negotiated, where political, social, and economic forces in the country may work together in order to restore stability, peace, and hope in that country. The dialogue must be serene, and it must lead to a concrete agreement that is verifiable. Costa Rica reiterates here its offer to work with Venezuela in such areas as will be determined in the principles of good faith and transparency. We're also here to urge the members of the opposition to come to the table, to negotiate, and to craft a national agreement that the Venezuelan people so needs. The actions that we've enumerated in our statement here, in our declaration, we think are very appropriate. Perhaps they might have been more ambitious, but never mind. They have been negotiated inclusively, transparently, and in good faith, and that indeed is the legitimacy of that declaration. It constitutes perhaps a first sketch, a first draft of what might be the roadmap to follow. We urge Venezuela to work towards peace, to honor its commitments under international law and the various multilateral treaties that it has subscribed in human rights, in democracy, and in the rule of law. We call on Venezuela to cease in its act of violence and hostility, in the arbitrary detentions, and to respect due process for all, no longer hauling civilians in front of military tribunals. But we also believe that the National Constituent Assembly being convened now is an idea that is flawed and that will be counterproductive. We have today an opportunity to either contribute or to remain in debt forevermore. Let's not have it be the latter. Costa Rica believes that constancy, that discipline, the unshakable spirit of Democrats everywhere should prevail today. So let's understand that the time to respond is now, and let us do so resolutely and with timeliness. There is a very grave situation unfolding. It will continue to graven, and we must move quickly and firmly. Costa Rica stands for democracy, fundamental freedoms, and the restoration of the rule of law. If we do not today adopt a clear, a cogent, and a practical declaration, which we would very much regret, we, in any event, declare our solidarity with Venezuela. You are not alone. We will not abandon you, and we will continue to work for a prompt solution to this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would just repeat, everybody has 6 minutes for future interventions. Ecuador has the floor. Carol Ramirez, the Subsecretary for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Foreign Minister of Guatemala, and all other ministers. It's very important to share with all of you because we think we have a very important pending hemispheric agenda. The integral development of our countries, policies on drugs, migrants, violence, corruption, legitimacy of democracy, military expenses in a country, in an area declared a zone of peace. All of this deserves broad discussion. This subject, or all of these subjects, need to be discussed. This organization has been called upon to update itself and not become an organization of the interests of some countries over others. So we are very sorry that the convening of this meeting took place in violation of procedures established without the agreement of all 34 countries and without the consent of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Our government is a government of dialogue, and we believe that only through conversations respecting self-determination in accordance with the Charter of the OAS, only in this way can we solve any situation. It is a matter of concern that we want to impose solutions on any country from here without listening to that country and without its consent. This reminds us of the darkest periods for the Latin America and the Caribbean, when the OAS was just a tool to impose agendas on our region. It's hard for us to understand that a mechanism used to deal with matters of security, such as this kind of meeting, is something to discuss the situation of Venezuela. From Ecuador, we recall that Latin America and the Caribbean have been declared by CELAC a zone of peace, and following this example, the OAS also declared Latin America as a zone of peace. For Ecuador, the only possible solution for the political problems in Venezuela is a political solution based on dialogue. We have constantly supported in UNASUR and CELAC this kind of approach, and we think that if we believe in dialogue and what we really want to do is cooperate in the search for solutions, our support for these bodies should be ongoing and complete. If we had to talk transparently on democracy, human rights, including the right to health, popular support for governments, we would have to have a meeting analyzing these subjects throughout the hemisphere. It's been said here that a number of the concerns are violence, separation of branches of government, protection of human rights, democratic legitimacy. If we analyze these aspects, unfortunately, we find that other countries in our hemisphere are immersed in the same problems and many times exponentially aggravated. And there are some of the countries in our hemisphere that are among the most violent in the world. Unfortunately, some countries are among the most unequal in the world, as ECLAC said yesterday, and this does affect the protection of human rights. We can find many other examples of problems that we could mention if we really want to start this kind of debate. But we believe that this is not the path that will lead us to a solution. We think if we really want to offer cooperation to Venezuela, we must look at the UNASUR way. The 21st of June, and there was a permanent council where Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero rather, promoted a solution for Venezuela. The former president or prime minister of Spain talked about strengthening governance in Venezuela, and I would like to recall he talked about approaching in democratic institutionality as the key for comity, solidarity, cooperation to overcome the serious economic problem of Venezuela and the problem of supply and shortages, in addition to the problem of disarming the population. We have to take up all of these initiatives and support them. We are sorry that the political opposition rejected this, and we definitely reject all of the organized violence that has caused so much damage and the loss of human lives. Therefore, Mr. President, we reiterate that the conflicts in Venezuela must be solved by Venezuela without foreign interference, and we certainly cannot allow this organization to become a sounding chamber for what is going on in Venezuela. There are actors that want to exacerbate the tensions and increase the social chaos there. Indeed, Venezuela, it does have a crisis, and we have to offer our solidarity and respect to help her get out of it, but without imposing and without demands. We join with other countries which wish to facilitate, not to be mediators or arbiters, but to facilitate solutions suggested by Venezuelans and carried out by Venezuelans. We hope that the Venezuelan people will find an early solution to this crisis. Thank you very much.
Head of International Affairs of Ecuador, Ms. Flujo Volum, the minister from St. Lucia, has the floor.
Mr. President, honorable ministers, heads of delegations, permanent representatives to the OAS, permanent observers, ladies and gentlemen. St. Lucia fully supports the statements made by Bahamas on behalf of CARICOM. St. Lucia's presence here today is indicative of our commitment to the Organization of American States, the member states that make up this hemispheric body, and in solidarity with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. St. Lucia remains concerned when any member of our hemispheric family struggles with unrest and socio-economic issues that affect their stability. We are troubled by the protests, the violence, and the deaths that have occurred in Venezuela, and deplore any and all actions that have led to and sustained such an environment. A single death is one too many, and our sympathies go to the families of the victims. As we look to our sister nation of Venezuela, we are seized with a desire to assist at a time when she faces challenges that threaten the very fabric of her development and advancement, and critically the future of her people. While we place the highest value on our long-standing relations with Venezuela, recognizing the symbiotic relationship which continues to exist between and among our peoples, the spirit of both the Charter of the OAS and that of civil society of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, underscore commitments that we in St. Lucia believe we must all adhere to. Adherence to the democratic values and principles, and the application of rule of law applied to us all, to those governing and to those being governed. As with our wider CARICOM colleagues, we favor inclusive and non-violent solutions to ensure that the Constitution of Venezuela is protected, along with critically important institutions that advance democracy, allowing for peace, justice, and the equal access to rights that we promise to all of our populations. In the defense of democracy and the promotion of human rights, peace, and security throughout the hemisphere, the OAS has responded well at key times to crises that have surfaced through the process of encouraging and advancing dialogue, The OAS, through the active participation of its member states, has demonstrated an ability to bring parties together to reconcile acute differences, to bridge polarizing situations that may exist within countries, and to facilitate the path to recovery. While St. Lucia hopes that our organization can continue to rise to the challenge, a reminder to us all, however, is that this organization is but the sum of its parts, and its parts are us, the member states. St. Lucia firmly believes that in order for us to see peace and normalcy in Venezuela, a Venezuela-led solution to the current social, political, and economic situation is the path to follow. We believe that a redoubling of efforts by all at constructive dialogue and negotiations is needed, that the engagement of trusted intermediaries to focus on already agreed points of convergence be the primary focus of all in order to unite the people of this great republic founded by Simón Bolívar. Democracy does not succeed and or fail in one moment, and we encourage the government and opposition parties to come to the table once again to set the precise parameters for an immediate and peaceful solution to the ongoing crisis. While we continue to believe that the OAS as an organization can play a positive role, we urge that the parties heed offers made by others, including our own CARICOM, as evidence of the commitment of the many friends of Venezuela to see peace and stability once again reign supreme. St. Lucia looks forward to the full and active participation by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in the inter-American system, as indeed we are stronger as a region with Venezuela amongst us. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Ahora le damos la...
Let us now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Honduras. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Foreign Minister of our sister Republic of Guatemala, ladies and gentlemen, Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Distinguished Secretary General, Distinguished Assistant Secretary General, distinguished special guests. We are here today because of the grave situation confronting the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, a sister republic, a founder of this hemispheric organization. For some years now, we have observed that the living conditions in that country have been under enormous pressure, under constant degradation in a number of fields, principally as a result of the lack of understanding on basic principles of democratic governance. Neither has it been easy or possible, it would appear, to resolve the grave economic issues confronting the population. In the last months, in the last weeks, the situation has gone from bad to worse. And far from getting together with members of the opposition or other social groups, the government has continued to impose its own will, which in turn has caused an ongoing erosion